Let's go back 130 years to a time when the Balkans looked completely different. A Polish doctor traveling through remote Bosnian villages records a scene that left him speechless. You will be amazed when you notice that almost every older girl, every peasant woman has a tattoo on her shoulders, the lower part of her arms, her hands, most even up to her fingers, and sometimes even on her forehead. In a world without modern needles, saloons and masters, tattoos were very much alive. They were done by children, on each other, in the meadows. With needles, soot and courage, they left each other signs that accompanied them throughout their lives. We will talk about traditional tattooing practice in the Balkans, last of its kind in Europe. This is a story about faith, pain, identity, and growing up. The main writer on traditional tattoos was Mario Petrić, and this video is mostly based on his doctoral thesis. Only in Bosnia he recorded more than 450 places where people used to get tattoos. Generally speaking, we will be talking about this practice during the 19th and 20th century, because we have very little information for all the other centuries. Before 10-15 years ago, the last living grandmothers, more than 200 of them, told stories about their tattoos. This table nicely shows us that in a very few places the practice of traditional tattooing remained after World War II. It is divided into time before and after World War II. It is further divided into places where tattooing is disappearing or no longer exists. Each number represents one of those places. 100 years ago, a good number of people, especially men, in Herzegovina, Dalmatia, and villages near cities in Bosnia had already stopped with tradition of tattooing. So everywhere near some kind of industry. The world is changing rapidly and tattoos are also dying out rapidly. In the years after World War II, men almost never did traditional tattoos. The list and map you can see does not fully reflect the situation because there were limited data, for example, the area of Serbia. As you can see, by far the most tattooing was done in Bosnia, but also in Macedonia in almost 200 places. In addition to the division into places, Petrić further divided everything into 17 regions. So not all places exist on this map as on this original one. So regions represent certain nations or people. For example, one of the regions in Bosnia is Visoko, where Croats used to get tattooed. One of the most beautiful regions is Goč and Vrnjačka Banja, where the people of Sarakačani were tattooed. Although the word Balkan is often connected with something negative, it is appropriate to call this custom Balkan. Often today, with traditional tattooing, you can find information related to only a specific nation. But nation or some other silly division didn't matter that much. You can see that diverse groups of people used to get tattoos. Even some Turks in Macedonia were tattooed. Also some gypsies, but little is written about them. Muslims generally did not get tattoos throughout Bosnia and Herzegovina, but there were also occasional examples even in Croatia. Here, for example, you can see the area of Bosnia where the dots indicate Croats and the triangles indicate Serbs. However, the practice of tattooing remained with the Croats longer. That is here easily visible, because unlike the black painted symbols, the empty symbols indicate that the practice of tattooing was abandoned. The most common name for traditional tattooing is bocanje. That can be translated to pricking or piercing. It was typical for Bosnia, except where sicanje was used. Sicanje can be translated to cutting. It was typical for Western Herzegovina. The name tattoo spread around the world when Western men somehow rediscovered tattooing, which was present in Europe in ancient times. In the 18th century, soon after the discovery of Tahiti, James Cook went there and wrote about their tattooing practices. That is the reason the word tattoo spread around the world. If history had turned out differently, the whole world would be saying, "I'm going to the Boca or Sika today." It is generally difficult to answer at what age a certain people or region did tattoos. In Balkans, it was pretty much done only during childhood. There is even a written case of babies being tattooed. The year is 1938 and Leopold is located above the fairy tale looking village in the heart of Bosnia. He wrote, "There are little ones who are only 1 year old and they already have a cross on their arms." The case of Jozo Soldo is interesting. He was caught by girls at the age of 4 who then tattooed a cross on his forehead. It was more common to get a tattoo between the ages of 5 and 9, but these are still exceptions. There are only a few cases of tattooing during the age of 6 in the central Bosnia. It is actually quite more common during the 7th year. However, tattooing at the age of 10 or later was much more common. For some reason, kids rarely got tattoos during the age of 9, 11 and 13. During the age of 12, it was very common around the present-day city of Petrić in Bosnia and in the area around the city of Korča in Albania. It is important to say that kids have been often tattooed many times. Of all the places, only in Dobretići and Jošan have tattoos been recorded that were exclusively done by grown-ups. All in all, it is clear that children between the ages of 10 and 15 were most likely to get tattoos. Also, it seems that tattooing in the year of 10, 12 and 15 had a special significance because we find it everywhere, regardless of nation. So even though the title of this video sounds shocking, which is its goal, it's not wrong to call it children's traditional tattooing. Tattooing was almost exclusively done in the spring. It was said that it was done when the trees were blooming. However, it was often performed on certain days and holidays during the spring, or few days before or after them. There are, of course, those for whom a particular day, season, or holiday was not important. By far, the most important was St. Joseph's Day, which was a real tattoo day in most villages. The feast of St. Joseph is celebrated on March 19th, just a day or two before the March equinox. Many believe that the original reason to get tattoos on that day was March solstice, which is celebrated by almost all indigenous people. In Bosnia, tattoos were often done during Lent in general. In addition to St. Joseph's Day, it was often done on the Annunciation, Holy Thursday and Friday, and Easter. In recent times, grandmas used to say that at that time Jesus suffered, so they should also. For example, tattooing for the Annunciation was practiced in central Bosnia and around the towns of Radoviš and Strumica in Macedonia. Now we will say something about those who generally got tattoos during the spring, no matter when. This was the case in almost all areas of Macedonia, Western Herzegovina and southwestern Bosnia. In Greece, tattoos are sometimes done during summer, and for Albania, we don't know. Today, it is often thought that this was a custom that was practiced only by women. There are actually few places where only women got tattoos. It was typical for both women and men among Serbs, Croats, Albanians, Romanians, and Vlachs, among Saracens in Greece, and Macedonians and Shopov in the area of Strumica. Tattooing exclusively for girls is limited to parts of Dalmatia, partially Western Herzegovina, and also it is found here and there in Bosnia, Macedonia, and Bulgaria. Kyoshani is one of the few places where only grown-ups get tattoos. What is certainly more important is that it is the birthplace of Jovanka Broz, Tito's third wife. Kyoshani were the only place where only men, whether Orthodox or Roman Catholic, got tattoos. So it is not surprising that Jovanka did not have traditional tattoos, except perhaps some that only her 32 years older husband knew. Among indigenous peoples in the world, there is usually a special person, a special master, or more often a female master who performs tattoos, and she often decides whether you deserve a tattoo at all. Although there are female masters in the Balkans, children most often tattooed each other. Tattooing between kids was done throughout Bosnia, also in Western Herzegovina. It is interesting that parts of Albania, Greece and Macedonia only practiced mutual tattooing between kids. When tattooing is done by more skilled people, in most cases it is done by women. Such tattooing has been recorded here and there in Bosnia. Again, keep in mind that these places are not just tattooed by skilled people, but also by children amongst themselves. The last way is to poke yourself. Although it was not often, there are few cases, especially among the Bulgarian and Macedonian Vlachs. In general, there were more places where someone tattooed himself, but we only mention those where it was a common practice. Someone who had more tattoos would sometimes draw a little cross himself. Those of them who have more complex tattoos did not do it by themselves. Most tattoos have been done using a regular sewing needle. Only in Western Herzegovina they sometimes used two needles. Only in some parts of Herzegovina and Bosnia they used a simple thorn, probably similar to this orange one, while in Albania they used pointed pine wood. Coal powder or soot was very often used as a base of the color. Those two would be mixed with various other things, although we will now talk in general terms about what was used where. Sometimes the same village would use different ingredients, probably whatever was easier to obtain at that time. In some places, 4 ingredients would be mixed into color. In Western Herzegovina, the two basics, charcoal or soot, were used without any additives or mixed with just water. For disinfection, the two basics are mixed with rakia in Albania, Bulgaria and Greece. Coal dust was often mixed with water or saliva in the area around city of Sinj and southwestern Bosnia and in Albania. Here we should mention Karl Steiner, not the one who described his 7,000 days in Siberia. He wrote more than 100 years ago, "Far more dangerous are those cases when the saliva from the mouth of the woman performing the tattoo transmits the syphilis virus to the skin of the person being tattooed." It's hard to say how many diseases were transmitted through tattooing with saliva, but tattooing with saliva certainly doesn't seem like a good idea. More often than coal, soot is the base. It is mixed with saliva or sometimes with honey in one part of western and central Bosnia. Soot was often mixed with mother's milk and sometimes with cow's or sheep's milk. It's interesting that mother's milk contains more antibacterial properties than regular cow's milk. Mothers in the places around Gornji Vakuf and especially Prozor very often gave their milk for tattooing. When milk was used, it was sometimes boiled. It was generally used in the central part of Bosnia and the parts towards the Neretva River. Around Kupres in central Bosnia, only milk from a mother breastfeeding her son, and often a son with blue eyes, was often used. In a few places, they mixed coal with kerosene. Believe it or not, in a few places, instead of coal and soot, gunpowder was the base. It was also mixed with various things. It was generally used only in these places and in some other regions. Finally, various other things were also mentioned as part of the ingredient for the color. In one example, sister's blood was used. In Western Herzegovina, to make the process easier, molds were sometimes made from ash bark. Before they stripped the bark, they would carve out the symbol on the tree. Around the city of Travnik in central Bosnia, there was also an interesting practice in 3 villages. There, the tattoo site was rubbed with stinging needle before being tattooed. It's hard to imagine the pain of getting a tattoo mixed with the burning sensation that nettles cause. Also, here and there, ink was used as a base. For example, grandmas around Kupres recently testified that they would first pierce the skin, then they would put a blue paper that would release the ink. Sometimes, after tattooing, they would put various bandages over the wound. Often, a crust would form after the pricking, which would fall off after a few days. There was only one way how they usually did tattoos, but also a few special ones. The basic one is stabbing with a needle the previously applied color on the skin. This is how tattoos were done almost everywhere. Less used method was stabbing with a needle and only then applying paint. The third way is the way in which tattoos are most often done today with just a needle. In this method, the color is inserted together with a needle, but not previously on the skin. This does not mean that the symbol is not already drawn on the skin. This type of tattooing was observed only in central and western part of Bosnia. Burning the skin is a similar custom to tattooing, because it was done in such a way that the red hot mushroom left a scar on the skin. It was done with this hoof fungus. This mushroom had a very important role for humans because it is excellent to start a fire and is also very useful for smoking bees. In East and Southeast Africa, there are or were peoples with similar custom of burning skin. On this map, it can be seen that Serbs and Croats burned skin in several places in Lika and western Bosnia. Until about 100 years ago, burning skin was a widespread custom in the Livno area. In one village, the burning was described like this. The mushroom was put on the skin and the skin broke, and that was the way the image was created. In the other, someone said, the mushroom was put on the skin and the skin broke, and that was the way the image was created. In the other village, someone said, the honor is who can last longer, who is braver and who has more patterns. While in the village of Zloselo in central Bosnia, it was described like this. A thin piece of mushroom was cut off, burned in the middle and placed on the hand so that a mark remains. Also in Zloselo, someone said, they compete to see who can last the longest. The Zloselo village can be translated to evil village, and they really were special. They were the only one who mixed gunpowder with mother's milk. During the 1960s, there were only a few places left where skin was burned this way. However, people in one part of Bosnia and in Dalmatian hinterland said that it was a very common practice during the past. Most common places to get tattoos were hands. especially the forearms. Sometimes the forehead or the bridge of the nose was also tattooed, although in a few cases the chest was also tattooed, especially in the middle, but various plant and geometric shapes were also present. There is no question that the basic symbol was the cross. This is of course the most famous Christian symbol, but it was also used before Christianity. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, a whole tattoo is often called a cross, even though sometimes there is not a single cross in the entire tattoo. When someone would draw something on his forehead, it was usually a simple cross like this one. It was done in Bosnia and Herzegovina and in Eastern Macedonia. The same type of crosses are placed on the bridge of the nose, between the eyebrows. In Bosnia, this was only done around Visoko, but there were people in Bulgaria, Greece and Albania with crosses between their eyebrows. These two are sometimes drawn alone. This one with a circle was known in central Bosnia and in Albania. Some are typical for a certain region. So in Herzegovina we find these dotted ones, or these two, and even this beautiful one with double branches. This one was typical for Dalmatian hinterland. Since Muslims in Albania also did traditional tattoos, it's no wonder that they liked the one with the crescent moon, but they also liked all of these. All of these other crosses were recorded here and there throughout Bosnia. Few people had the monogram of Christ. Unlike the cross, all other symbols are not known as Christian ones. The second most common symbol is the circle, usually called kolo. It is very often decorated around the outside edge with dots, branches and hooks. It is difficult to talk about the meanings of the tattoos, because the meanings for pretty much the same tattoos can be different in two sisters. One theory is that the kolo symbolized togetherness and the circle of dancers in a traditional folk dance. However, in a few places in Bosnia and Albania, the kolo is a symbol of the sun, while the fence is a symbol of the moon, and some symbols are stars. All of these are kolo symbols. It was most often tattooed in central Bosnia. This trio can be found in Dalmatian hinterland. This one was used only by Vlachs and Aromanians in Macedonia. Catholics in Albania loved these simple ones and this one. All of these symbols are symbols of ograda, which is translated to fence. Just like the kolo, ograda often had a cross in the middle and decorations along the outer edge. Similar to what people think of fences today, for some people they were a protection from bad things. Ogradas were tattooed almost exclusively in Bosnia. In central Bosnia, these were tattooed. These were made around the city of Jajce, and these were found throughout western Bosnia. Next is the symbol of narukvica, which is easily translated to bracelet. However, unlike material bracelets, these were much wider, often around 10 centimeters. Also, one end of the bracelet is not usually connected to the other one, since it was dangerous to tattoo above the veins. They are often made of two parallel lines or a broken ornament. Some were very simple, but also there were ones that were very complex. They are sometimes called the Lord's Prayer, so it is quite possible that they had a similar purpose to the Rosary. These are the ones that the Vlachs Aromanians used in Albania, while the same one was used in Western Herzegovina and neighboring Bosnia. These detailed ones have only been seen in central Bosnia. The last very common symbol is the grana, which is translated as branch or twig. Branches were very popular in Bosnia. Branches are very often part of a larger symbol. These kinds of branches were also made in Albania, and the same triple ones were typical around the city of Jajce. All of these symbols, in some occasions, had different names. From this point onward, more complex tattoos begin. On all of them, one can easily notice that they consist of basic symbols arranged into one beautiful complex. And now, for the end, we will talk about all the other symbols. In Albania, these were typical among Muslims. These fat dots were tattooed in several places, and all the other ones were found only in one area. For example, this saber in western Bosnia. These symbols have been found in Albania. People saw their religion as the biggest reason why they got tattooed, whether they were Orthodox or Roman Catholic. Tattooing is very painful and takes a lot of time, especially when done with just a needle. One of the reasons to do it was to see who can withstand the pain. But almost no one mentions that as the main reason. Burning of the skin with mushroom was much more painful, so the main reason for doing it might be to see who can withstand the pain. Some people don't even know the real reason. It is also worth to mention what Grandma Luca said one time. Well, there was also fashion, to be more beautiful, just like girls get tattoos today. For some people, tattoos protected them against curses. Vlach's women sometimes say that the reason for their tattoos was to know that they are Vlach. People mention various other reasons, and here is an interesting one from another grandma. The one who doesn't get stabbed with a needle in this world, in the next world he will get stabbed with a crowbar. English painter and writer Mary Edith Durham explored Albania more than 100 years ago. She wrote that priests and teachers consider tattooing to be a disgusting practice. One priest from Skodar she met there was very familiar with the shepherds who live in the mountains, and those were the people who did tattooing. He told her, "They have more pagan beliefs that they won't tell me. I noticed that they believe in two forces, light and darkness, fighting each other, good and evil. These tattoos are somehow related to that. Snake also, which they sometimes tattoo and draw on the walls." When grandmas were asked 10-15 years ago why they got tattooed, many said that it was done so that people wouldn't convert to Turkish religion. However, that didn't stop some tattooed women from marrying someone dear to their hearts. Also, some grandmas aren't sure what was the real reason. Others say that the main reason was that Turks had the right to be with the bride on her wedding night. If this was the case, I'm not sure a tattoo would have stopped some Turk. They also say that Ottomans took children into slavery, and tattoos helped them not end up as slaves. With tattoos, they could also be recognized by their families one day. All of these questions, if that is possible, need more research by the historians. Stories like these can be read everywhere these days. How much of this was the reason people got tattooed and how much is folktale, it's hard to say. A quotation from this novel, whose plot takes place about 100 years ago, beautifully illustrates why it is difficult to say when and why people got tattooed. It is written, "Women in Kakanj and Kreševo get tattooed so they don't forget something. It's not known what they shouldn't forget, because it's something long forgotten. So today They get tattooed only because they know that their mothers and grandmothers were tattooed. They also don't remember what it's really about, what secret it is, but they saw tattoos on their grandmothers and mothers. And so, what shouldn't be forgotten for dear life has been forgotten who knows when. Many historians, archaeologists, and anthropologists have given their ideas about how old is the tradition of tattooing. Some believe that the practice began with the invasion of the Turks into the Balkans. Others believe that it began earlier and has to do with bogomelism. However, I would agree with others who say that the roots go back to prehistoric times. A little personal advertising here. Last video is about the oldest mummies with tattoos in the world. He is 5,300 years old and was found in Italian Alps. It is sometimes very difficult to know whether ancient writers mentioned tattooing, cutting, burning, or body painting when they wrote about 2000 years ago. Of those four, only cutting the skin has not been seen in the Balkans. So ancient writers mention some of those three techniques among all of these peoples. For example, Strabo is very important. He wrote this about Yapodi. That area is poor. They live mostly on sorghum and millet. Their weapons are Celtic and they get pierced like other Illyrians and Thracians. This pierced can also be translated as poking or tattooing. But after ancient authors for 1500 years, no one writes about tattooing in the Balkans. Then in 1666, Haut, a British diplomat who probably never left Istanbul, wrote this book. But it's very unclear if he even mentioned tattooing. Many people mention that Illyrian, better called prehistoric needles that have been found are evidence of tattooing during prehistory. We can't really say that because needles can be used for all kinds of things. That's why a new method in archaeology is interesting. It involves looking at the tip of a needle under a microscope, and based on how it looks, you can assume whether it was used for tattooing or not. But that hasn't been done on Balkan prehistoric needles. It would be interesting to compare traditional tattooing in the Balkans with that in the Middle East, Morocco or India. For example, tattooing a cross on forehead is also present in Berber women in Morocco. In any case, traditional tattooing was present on all continents and many of them have many connections with the Balkans. Story of traditional tattoos has practically disappeared after who knows many hundreds and probably thousands of years. But many people today are inspired by traditional symbols, so there is a trend towards this type of tattooing. We can say that a revival of traditional symbols is happening. The question arises as to why did the traditional way of tattooing died out in the 20th century. One of the reasons is that girls and boys stopped guarding livestock, and that is when tattoos were usually done. The Vlachs, Romanians and Saracens in Macedonia were exclusively shepherds who lived in remote areas. With industrialization, people increasingly live in one area, engage less in animal husbandry and agriculture. Also, teachers for health or other reasons tell kids not to get tattooed. Men see tattooing in the military or cities as something modern and good, unlike traditional tattooing. Those who continued to get tattoos in the 20th century were mostly poor people who then became even more socially unacceptable because of tattoos. Messages from ancestors, person's identity, tradition, culture, and who knows what else was hidden in tattoos. But tattoos were more and more seen as something primitive. And what is very important, the new Yugoslavia was strictly against religion and with that against tattoos. Most often it was women who had tattoos. They were afraid or even lost their jobs because of it. We managed to write down only one small part, while the oldest and largest part of the whole story disappeared forever. We only found out something about decorative function of tattoos and how tattoos represent a feature of the Christian religion. But they probably used to have some kind of magical, sun-related, social and decorative function in the past. With a tattoo, one would become an adult. The question is whether the cross was once a secondary symbol, just part of a larger whole. In the Bible, it is written that tattoos aren't something a Christian should do. Some university professors wrote that this council in NIKAIA banned tattooing. However, we think this is simply not true. The importance of traditional tattoos was lost over time, and people only remembered that they were a sign of faith and protection. The original meaning was probably not to prevent a person from converting to another faith. The first big writer on traditional tattoos testified to that when he wrote, "To the opinion that tattooing is not linked to Catholicism, we are compelled by the fact that the local clergy has absolutely no interest in this practice, and that Catholic missionaries in regions where they encountered this practice have been zealous in opposing it. They only made a concession to a tradition deeply rooted in the soul of the people."